So today we are finishing up our series called Heart of Peace, in which we have been looking at the peacemaking concepts from the book The Anatomy of Peace, Resolving a Heart of Conflict. We've talked about how it is essential for us to see people as people, and how when we stop seeing people as people, this is when our hearts go to war. We've explored the importance of empathy and understanding in order to have a heart of peace. Today we're going to kind of be pulling all of it together. We are going to really dig into how we recognize that our hearts are at war, and then what we do from there. How do we go about making peace? So let's start today to take a look at the anatomy of peace concept of justification, and how our need to be justified is what keeps our hearts at war. Now, before we get too deep in this, I want to be clear about what we're talking about with justification. This is not the Wesleyan kind of justification. That's the kind of justification through God's grace. It's the kind of justification that we experience when we say yes to Jesus. And that's something different than what we are talking about today. We're going to set that Wesleyan concept of justification aside for just a second, and we're going to talk about something different today. The kind of justification that we are talking about today is self-justification. It is our own internal need to justify our thoughts and our actions to ourselves when we have done something that doesn't quite align with the core of what we believe or know to be right. We have a sense of what just seems right, don't we? And then we have the option. We can either choose to honor this sense, or we can choose to betray it. For example, perhaps you have kind of snapped at someone with some unkind words. Now, we don't want to be unkind and we don't want to be mean. That goes against our sense of what is right. And so sometimes when we've done this, we can start to justify those actions or unkind words, and we can sort of just let that kind of stew around inside of us. And this can make us to start to focus on all the things that maybe made it reasonable for us to have an outburst like that, something that means that this person deserved this outburst. And then all of a sudden, as we focus on these negative things, we are not inclined to work towards reconciliation. In fact, this might lead us to continue to think bad thoughts about this person or to mistreat this person again. Although there is nothing that we can do right here and now to erase the mistreatments of the past, whether they're ones that we've done to somebody or that somebody has done to us, the way that we carry ourselves forward in the present determines how we will carry forward the memories of those mistreatments. When we see others as objects, we dwell in the injustice that we have suffered in order to justify our own actions. And keeping these mistreatments and these sufferings alive inside of us ends up becoming really important. But when we treat other people as people, we become free of our need for justification. We don't need to spend so much of our energy focusing on the worst things that have ever happened to us. We are free to see the good, the bad, and the indifferent in others. But that's not possible when our hearts are at war. A heart at war needs enemies to justify its warring. It needs enemies and mistreatment more than it needs peace. Wow. Have you ever thought about it that way? Your heart needing mistreatment and enemies more than it desires peace. When we see people as objects, we harbor bitterness in our hearts. Our warring hearts need those mistreatments in order to justify the bitterness and the anger and to let those things continue to be a part of who we are and how we respond. This kind of self-justification happens when our hearts go to war, and it has some warning signs. The Anatomy of Peace uses the word horribilization, and I think that's an interesting kind of word, but can you relate to that? It means sort of that we continue to think about all of the horrible things about someone, and we begin to exaggerate the horrible. This involves a lot of exaggeration. Exaggerations abound with a heart at war. When our hearts are at war, we tend to exaggerate other people's faults. We might exaggerate our own piety and our own innocence. We also tend to exaggerate the difference between us and others. Notice that this is the opposite of empathy. Anything that justifies our warring becomes incredibly important to us. And all of this happens due to self-betrayal. We had a sense of what was right, but we chose to betray that sense, and so we need to justify our actions. The self-betrayal corrupts the way that we see everything. When we betray ourselves, the whole world changes around us because we have chosen a different way of being in the world, and this way requires justification. It is our need for justification that puts us into those boxes that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, the better than, worse than, I deserve, or need to be seen boxes. Now, these boxes are just simply different styles of the same things. They are ways that we justify ourselves. Sometimes the particular box that we tend to choose stems from a lifetime of little tiny self-betrayals. And it manifests itself differently in each of us, depending on what we've experienced in our life, how we've been raised. But while the boxes we are in may look very different on the outside, the reason for the box is the same. And we can't find our way to a heart of peace until we no longer have a need for justification. Most of these little wars that individuals have with each other are in kind of the Cold War variety. They're the result of a buildup of lingering resentment. Maybe they are grudges that are from something that happened a long time ago. Maybe they're about resources that have been disputed over rather than shared. Or maybe it's about help that wasn't offered in a time of need. These little acts of war can even seem small and insignificant, but if they sit there and we allow them to smolder, they can threaten our relationships. They threaten the health of our homes and our workplaces and our places of worship. Our gospel passage from Matthew today, Jesus teaches about how damaging a heart of war can be. When you offer your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there at the altar and go. First, be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. You see, if we come to worship with a heart at war, our heart is divided. We cannot give our whole selves to God in worship if part of our hearts is holding on to bitterness and envy and anger. Jesus teaches that reconciliation is a vital part of the Christian life. Jesus is asking us to consider, how can you make an offering at the altar when your heart is full of anger or malice or envy or bitterness? The interesting thing here to realize is that even when we are doing something good, bringing a gift, offering ourselves before God, it is the orientation of our heart that makes all the difference. And it is possible to do really good things, but still maintain a heart at war. We can do the right things, but still harbor in our hearts bitterness that necessitate justification. For Jesus, the priority is clear. Having a right relationship with God requires us to have a right relationship with our neighbors. Now, this love your neighbor kind of thing isn't a touchy-feely, lovey-dovey kind of love. This is really hard work. It takes a lot of intentionality because your neighbor includes your enemy. It includes the person that you don't see eye to eye with. It includes the person who just kind of rubs you the wrong way. It includes the person that absolutely makes your blood boil. and it includes the person who has done you wrong. Too many times we think about our relationship with God as something that's completely personal. It's just between us and God. But Jesus, time and time again, challenges us in his teaching to recognize that our relationship with others is a reflection of our relationship with God. It comes back to those two most important commandments. Jesus said these things sum up the entire law and the prophets. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. If part of our heart harbors bitterness or anger, we cannot truly love God with all of our heart, soul, strength, and mind. Anger and malice in our hearts are like cancers. They grow, and they can be deadly both for the one who's holding on to that bitterness and for the one who this bitterness is directed towards. It is destructive to have these feelings hidden in our hearts, no matter how well we mask them with our outward appearance of kindness and piety. Jesus wants our hearts on the inside to match who we are on the outside and how we present ourselves. Jesus calls us to offer forgiveness to those who have wronged us and to seek forgiveness for those whom we have hurt. When we have truly offered and sought forgiveness, we no longer need to justify our actions and our feelings, and we get outside of the box. Because we are each responsible for our own blaming, self-justifying boxes, the amazingly wonderful news is that we, on our own, can get ourselves out of them. Make no mistake, when others have hurt us, it may be the original pain may be their fault. They may have caused this hurt, but it's our boxes that keep us there, and those boxes are self-made. These are the boxes that keep our hearts at war, and they actually increase our conflict and our pain and our struggles. We don't want that. So how do we get our hearts out of this cycle, and how do we make for ourselves a heart of peace? The Anatomy of Peace has given us 4 steps for getting outside of the box and having a heart of peace. The first step is simply to notice the signs of justification. So we can think, if we see ourselves horribilizing someone or maybe blaming someone, this might be a flag that we are justifying ourselves and that we are having a heart at war. When we recognize this about ourselves, then the next step is to find an out-of-the-box place. Now, an out-of-the-box place is not a physical location. It means a place within us that is unencumbered by these boxes. It's a place that we have access to anytime we want to think about it. It might be a memory of a loved one or a treasured friend that you are out of the box with. Sometimes simply remembering these people can help us to have a different vantage point. Sometimes a book or a poem or a particular scripture passage can have a powerful effect on us in these moments so that we can find that different perspective. Or maybe there were times when someone treated you really, really kindly, especially when you didn't deserve it. These kind of memories and calling on these kind of memories is very powerful. Sometimes remembering this place, this feeling inside of us can help us when we find ourselves raging against someone that we don't feel deserves to be treated kindly. It sounds fairly basic, but most people who are trying to find their way out of conflict and bitterness don't think to do this. Finding ourselves stuck in bitterness, it may never have occurred to us that at any moment we have access to unbitter places inside of us. So now, as we relocate ourselves outside of our box and we find a new perspective, the third step is to ponder the situation anew. From this perspective, we are able to view our thoughts about the situation in new ways. We can see those things that trouble us in ways that we weren't able to see just moments before. And from this vantage, we can ask the following questions. What are this person's troubles, burdens, challenges, or pains? This is where empathy comes in, seeing below the surface, trying to truly understand where this person is coming from. And then we might consider, how might I be adding to this person's challenges or burdens or pains? Or how might I or my group have neglected or mistreated this person or group of people? In what ways have my better than, I deserve, worse than, or need to be seen boxes obscured the truth about others and about myself that just keep us locked in this conflict? And then as we pondered these questions, we end up here. What am I feeling I should do for this person or group? What could I do to help? Imagine what we might learn from this perspective when we consider our situation in this way. The fourth step is to ask on what we have discovered, to act on the things that we feel we should do. Do what the Spirit prompts us to do. Maybe it's asking for forgiveness, or maybe it's offering it. Do what the Spirit prompts you to do. The Spirit of God is a spirit of unity. It is not a spirit that divides us, but it's a spirit that calls us together. When we act in a way that honors our sense of what is good and what is right, we no longer need to justify our feelings and our actions. And our hearts can be at peace even when we are in the middle of really difficult situations or in the middle of conflicts that are very difficult to navigate. In our gospel passage today, Jesus shined a light on how important it is for us to take care that our hearts and our actions are in line with God's grace. Whatever is in our heart that displaces or denies the grace of God at work in the lives of others gets in the way of our relationship with God. Ultimately, when we deny the work that God's grace is doing in the lives of someone with whom we are in conflict, we deny how God's grace is at work in our life to reconcile and redeem us. You see, we can't justify ourselves. The grace of God through the love of Jesus Christ has justified us all. We can never become righteous by our own actions. The grace of God through Jesus Christ is what makes us righteous. And this is what makes other people righteous as well. Pastor Reginald Broadnax has written, "Forgiveness, reconciliation, and grace are not merely experiences of the individual's heart, but the experiences and practices by which we bear witness to God's transformation of the world." Isn't that beautiful? I want to bear witness to God's transformation of the world. And we can when we foster in ourselves a heart of peace. So now, as we gather together at Christ's invitation around the table of grace to share in this holy meal, may we experience God's grace that offers forgiveness and reconciliation to transform our hearts and our world.